Hey friends, I'm Jonny May and welcome to this lesson where I'm going to teach you how to create an epic piano solo. And if you think that to create an amazing piano solo, you just need to learn a few more scales or chords or riffs or licks, you are wrong, because what makes a great sounding solo is 4 essential devices. There are 4 things that I use to create an amazing solo so that when I finish my solo, I get a great response from the audience. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you these 4 key devices, and we're going to use a classic tune, Bruce Hornsby's The Way It Is. You're going to love this one. So The Way It Is a classic tune. I'm sure you've heard of it. A lot of fun to play. So how would you solo on this tune or this chord progression? Well, let's first go over the chords so you understand them, and then I'm going to teach you the 4 techniques. So the first chord is A minor. Really simple. Then we go to an E minor, and then we go to a D major, and then a C major, and then we're down to a G major, right? And then D major, and then C major, okay? It's a pretty simple chord progression, but how do you build a great solo on this? Well, many students think, well, I need to learn a lot of different scales and riffs and licks, but this couldn't be further from the truth. You see, you can create a great sounding solo with only 2 scales, and you're gonna see at the end of this video, I'm gonna put together an epic sounding solo with just 2 scales. The key is the 4 techniques, which I'm gonna show you next. It's kind of hidden here on the screen, the 4 characteristics of a great solo. But first, I wanna talk about the 2 scales, okay? And they're super easy. We're in the key of G major, and so the first scale that I recommend is simply your G major scale, and you can do a lot with this scale. I'm going to show you in just a minute, but G major scale is going to sound great. But the second scale is really your money scale, and so mixing the 2 scales together is the way to go. The second scale is what's called the major blues scale, and it uses these 6 notes, and it gives you a little blue note, which is going to give you some nice rub. I was actually playing the major blues scale at the beginning of this video. It's a really powerful scale, and it works on lots of chords. Okay, so only 2 scales, but what do you do with these scales? And this gets us into the most important topic of this lesson, the 4 characteristics of a great solo. So we're going to dive into these, but first, what generally makes a good solo? Well, a good solo is like a good story. And generally a good story, you have a main character who goes off on some type of adventure and they encounter challenges and hardship. Maybe they have to defeat the dragon, but eventually it reaches a climax and then it finally resolves. And that is a good story. It takes you on an adventure. And I hear a lot of students, they just kind of play the same thing in their solos the entire time, and they don't take the listener on an adventure. So how do you take your listener on a musical adventure? Well, there are 4 things that I like to do. And the first one is your scale spice. So the G scale, the G major scale, it's kind of a vanilla scale. It's gonna have a nice sound on your chords, but it doesn't have a lot of spice to it, okay? This is a spicier scale. And so when you're building your solo or when you're telling your little musical story, it's best to start off with a simpler scale like your G major scale and then work into a spicier scale like your G major blues scale, okay? So what we're doing here is we're trying to tell a musical story with our solo and build our solo. So start with a less spicy scale and go to a more spicy scale. The second thing is the range, okay? When you start your solo, if you start in more of a low range, that's gonna have a little lower energy, okay? And we're gonna talk about this, the best range to use throughout your solo. And as you move up the piano into a higher range, it's gonna have a brighter sound. Give it a listen. Right? That's a little lower energy. Now give it a listen. It's a lot brighter, it's a lot happier, a lot more energy up above. So you're gonna use your range to tell a good musical story in your solo. The third is texture, okay? And what I mean by texture is how many notes you're playing at the same time. So when you play 1 note at a time, it's gonna have less energy. But when you start adding notes, like 2, 3, and 4 notes at the same time, it's going to have more energy. And then finally, 4th is your note value. And this basically means longer note values are going to have lower energy, and shorter note values or faster notes are going to have higher energy. And so you're going to want to use these 4 techniques in your solo to really build your solo and give it a nice epic ending. All right, next I'm going to show you how to use each of these 4 techniques to tell your story. But before we do this, if you're enjoying the lesson, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this. All right, so how do you tell a good story? Well, most stories have chapters, and so it's helpful to think of each chapter of your story. The way I encourage you to think of this is chapter 1. Chapter 1 is going to be the full chord progression that I taught you, and then when you repeat that progression, you'll be in chapter 2. And then 3. So we're going to do 5 chapters here. And the goal here is to build your solo, build that energy. So once you get to that climax and you resolve, it's very satisfying for your listener. Okay? So what do you do in chapter 1? Well, in chapter 1, you want to start simple. And so what I recommend is to start with your major scale, right? G major scale. It's going to be a little more vanilla, but you can build to that spicier major blues scale. The range here, I recommend that you start in the mid-range of the piano. So you're going to start on this G, just below middle C, and you're generally going to play all the way up to this D, kind of an octave and a half range. You can go a little lower or a little higher, but generally I'm going to stay in this mid-range of the piano. Then in terms of texture, I recommend that you play mostly single notes. So you can play some notes combined, but in general, you're going to play separate single notes. And the last thing is your note value. Okay, remember earlier I said longer note values are going to have lower energy. And so in this section, I recommend longer note values. As an example, there's not a lot going on here rhythmically in the right hand. It's a little more simple, okay? So I'm gonna play you a very brief example solo of what you might play in chapter 1. Once again, I'm gonna use the major scale. I'm gonna stay in the mid-range of the piano. I'm mostly gonna use single notes, and I'm generally gonna use longer note values. Give it a listen. Now, once again, at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to put all 5 chapters together, but it is so important that you watch the full video so you understand the process, because I want you to be able to build your own solos. I don't want you to just copy me. I want you to understand the system that I use. Okay, chapter 2, we're going to take that story up. We're going to add a little more tension, a little more energy, and we're going to build that solo. So how do you do it? Well, use the 4 techniques, the 4 devices. And so for chapter 2, I recommend that you use your major blues scale automatically. We're going to get a little blues spice in there. So that's going to give it some more energy. I also recommend that you lift up to the upper mid range, or the mid upper range. Generally speaking, a good range here is going to be G up to your D. Okay, this is mid upper range of the piano. It's going to get a little brighter, a little more exciting. And then in terms of the texture, I recommend that you start sliding your notes. And so for the major blues scale, you're going to slide the B, you're going to slide the A. Notice I use one finger, that's my middle finger, and I'm sliding up from the B flat to the B, right? It's one motion, and then B flat down to A. And then I slide the E, okay? That's like a musical texture. It's kind of like 2 notes at the same time. I know they're separated, but it's its own texture. And so the slide notes is gonna give it a little more energy. I recommend that you use this. And finally, a medium note value. And so you'll notice that I'm using faster notes like 16th notes, which are a little more exciting. So 16th notes sound like this. So those are the 4 characteristics, and once again, what I want to do, just like in chapter 1, is I want to show you what you might do in this chapter of your solo. Once again, we're using a spicier scale. Our major blues scale, that's going to lift the energy. We're going to go into the mid-upper range, a little brighter on the piano, really effective, and we're going to start increasing our texture. We're going to start using 2 notes kind of butted together. In fact, on the slides, you could play them like this. It's not really a slide, it's kind of like a crunch, but it has a very similar sound. And then finally, we're gonna use some faster notes to give it a little more energy. And so here's a little example solo of what you might play in chapter 2. By the way, if you want to go deeper on soloing at the piano and you really want to take your soloing up to that next level and sound like a pro, we have put together the full learning tracks for you over at pianowithjohnny.com. I want to briefly show you where you can find these. If you click on learning tracks and select your level, so if you're a beginner, you select beginner, and you head down here to skills, you'll see all of our skill learning tracks where you will learn how to master a skill. And you're going to scroll all the way down to soloing fundamentals and soloing in styles. These are our flagship learning tracks on each of these topics. In soloing fundamentals, you will learn all of the core knowledge that you need to solo. We're going to talk about scales and chord progressions and exercises and how to use different modes and how to combine your modes and how to solo over different types of chords like seventh chords in jazz. A ton of great stuff here. And then if you go back to soloing in styles, you will learn how to solo in different styles like blues and jazz and pop and funk. There's a ton of material here. Latin jazz soloing. It's a ton of fun, and we have learning tracks for all playing levels. So I'll put a link to these below. All right, my friends, we are ready for chapter 3 of your solo, and we are telling an epic story here, so it's building. How do you build into chapter 3? Okay, we're getting close to the climax here. Well, in chapter 3, I recommend that you use the same scale because remember, the major blues scale is going to have the most spice. However, I recommend that you take your range up even higher. So now we're going to start on that G and go way up here to that high G. So now we're really in the upper range of the piano. It has a really bright, happy, magical sound to it, and it's really going to sound good up here. And then for texture, we're going to start to use double notes. Okay, and so what I recommend here is that you take the top note of that G major blues scale and you harmonize it with these bottom notes of the G major blues scale. The way I like to do it is I'll upslide the E like this, and then come down to D. And then for the lower position here, I do like this. Like this. Basically, it's B flat and D with a slide, like that. You see that? And then a down slide with the D on top. Okay, so I'm playing two notes at the same time with the slide. It's going to add a lot of energy to your solo. And then finally, shorter note values. So now the notes are going to be really close together. Here's a little example of what this might sound like. Okay, so that's the idea behind chapter number 3. Notice that there's a lot more energy happening now. I'm using really short note values. They're quick. I'm doing these double notes with the slides. I'm using that major blues scale, and I'm using that upper range. And if you've been watching this video, you should notice, hey, this is really starting to build, and it's only going to get better from here. Now, what I want to do is I want to quickly improvise a solo using these 4 criteria. Again, this is chapter 3. Give it a listen, and once again, at the end of the video, I'm going to put all 5 chapters together. All right, you're doing a great job. I want to move you on to chapter number 4, okay? It's gonna get really cool here. Okay, so in chapter number 4, on these scales, instead of using the major scale or the major blues scale, at this point, I like to mix both of these scales together. So you have more options here in terms of your colors. And I do one more thing. Remember, I was sliding that E on the major blues scale. I'm actually going to add that as a note to your scale. So now you can play your major scale, your G major scale, and you can throw in this little blue note from the major blues scale, and you can throw in the E flat, which is one of the slide notes on the major blues scale. So you have a lot of options in terms of notes, really gives it some nice color. Then on the range, you're gonna go into what I call the full range. And for the full range, you can go all the way down to this G, but now you can go way up to the D up here. It's gonna sound really hip. Then for the texture, at this point, I like to go to 4-note chords, okay? So at this point, instead of, playing, I don't know, like that or like that, you're gonna play it like that. Big 4-note chords, like on my A minor. Okay, so in this case, I'm basically playing the notes of like a C major, but I'm moving around with the melody and I'm keeping the internal notes the same, okay? So generally, you wanna match your chord in the right hand, and whenever possible, you wanna grab 4 notes, okay? Now, one caveat to this is if you're moving really fast with octaves, it's really hard to hit 4-note chords. So if you're playing quickly, that's fine. You can just play octaves, but generally when you land after a phrase, I do recommend that you try to grab the full chord. The last thing is your note value, and for this section, I recommend that you play medium short notes. And recall earlier in chapter 3, I said play short notes. So why are we playing medium short notes? Well, it's because you're using a lot of octaves in your solo, and it's hard to play really fast octaves. And so for this section, you don't have to play as short note values, okay? Because you're gonna get a lot of energy from all of the other things we're doing in this section, like playing 4-note chords and playing really high on the piano. So here's an example of some of these medium short notes, and I'm gonna be using mostly octaves as I play my line. All right, and just as we did earlier, I want to play you a quick sample improvisation using these kind of parameters here, medium short notes, 4-note chord textures. We're going to combine our major scale and our major blues scale, and we're going to use more of the full range of the piano. Give it a listen. All right, well done. I want to take you into chapter number 5. And chapter number 5 is the most exciting chapter because this is when you're going to reach your climax and then finally you're going to resolve it. And it's going to feel that sense of relief. We bring it back home at the end and it makes a great story. Okay, so how do you reach that kind of final battle scene toward the end of the movie, right? Well, to do this, we're going to do several things. First, we're going to use our mixed scale like we did earlier. Okay, so recall, you got a lot of notes you can choose from on your scale, okay? The second thing is you're going to use what I call the extreme range of the piano. Recall earlier, I gave you this big range up to the D, but now you can go, I mean, technically, you can go way up here to the C if you wanted, okay? So we're going to have full coverage here. We are going to play pretty high in just a moment, but full range. For the texture, you can go single, you can go double, or you can go 4 notes, okay? So you have full options here to explore. And finally, for your note value, you're gonna go super short. And I think this is what matters the most to me on this section. I'm gonna go for the really short note values to make it really sparkle, really be exciting. It's gonna be way up high. I wanna show you an example of some super short note values. I'm gonna play this little passage here so you can hear what it sounds like. So as you can hear, it is super flashy, super fun. And so what I want to do is I want to improvise a little solo for chapter 5. And once again, I'm going to play super short note values. I'm going to mix up the textures. I'm going to mix up my scales. And I'm going to use the full or extreme range of the piano. Give it a listen. All right, finally, I'm gonna put together a full solo, but before we do this, I wanna give you 3 more tips to creating an amazing sounding solo. The first is to use lead-in lines. And when you finish one of your chapters, instead of just starting your solo in the next chapter, it's helpful to play a little lead-in line to carry you into the next chapter. So you're gonna hear me do that when I get to the end of the chord progression. I'm gonna play a little line that moves me up to that higher range of the piano. Second is as you're playing your solo and you're going through these chapters, it's helpful to play a little louder, right? Because we're building that energy, okay? So gradually increase your volume. The third thing that's really helpful to create a great solo, when you get to the end of the solo and you're playing way up high, super energetic, is to bring it back down the piano. Because remember, a good story at the end brings the character usually back home and they've learned something about their adventure, and so you want to bring people back home, okay? So bring it back down the piano. You're going to hear me play that at the end. And are you ready for the solo? Here it is. Hey, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment if you enjoyed the video, and be sure to check out pianowithjonny.com. We have tons of step-by-step lessons and courses for all playing levels where you'll learn everything that you need to know to play your favorite songs, styles, and how to improvise at the piano. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.